Welcome to My Child Died, Now What? I'm Gary Sturgis, grief specialist and the author of Surviving Grief 365 Days a Year. I'm talking with grief and bereavement specialist Corrie Sirota about the topic of child loss. Corrie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this tender topic.
My pleasure to be. Thank you for having me.
So I have to tell you guys a little bit about Corrie because she has quite an impressive resume. Corrie holds a master's degree in social work from McGill University in Montreal, Canada, as well as a graduate in loss and bereavement where she continues to teach. As a licensed psychotherapist, Corrie maintains a private practice specializing in loss and bereavement. She's the author of Someone Died, Now What? A personal and professional perspective on coping with grief and loss, and also Lost and Found, a grief activity journal. Corrie is also the clinical director of Myra's Kids Foundation, a nonprofit organization that offers bereavement programs for children ages 6 through 17. Corrie's TEDx presentation, Lost and Found, Creating New Normals After Someone You Love Dies, has been viewed by thousands of people. So today, Corrie and I are going to talk about child loss. And I thought, Corrie, that I would start by saying that, people often call the death of a child the ultimate loss. And so the question that seems to come up the most for parents that have lost a child is how do they answer the question of how many children do you have?
Well, it's certainly not something that's going to slide right off the tongue. I don't think it's ever going to slide right off the tongue. That said, it's something that they have to find their own comfortable way of answering. So some people will, if they had two children and one child dies, they'll say, no, I have one. Others will say, I have one child and I have a child that died. And others will say, one of the families I work with, he has three children, one child died. He says, I have three children at home, which is his way of not, I suppose, engaging people in the conversation. It really is a very personal decision and comfort level. And I suspect people will change their answer based on who they're talking to, their comfort level, and where they are in their grief process.
That's true. And I think also, there's the question of, am I still a parent? If someone lost a child and perhaps it was their only child.
Well, I think they're always a parent. You're always a parent. You never stop being a parent. You may just not have a live child at home. But one of my clients said something so beautiful. After her child died, she said, I may not parent the way I thought I was going to, but I'm going to parent the way I know how. And she has created beautiful initiatives and foundations. And it's just that comment stuck with me very much.
That's great. So when parents lose a child of any age, how can they best support their other children as bereaved siblings?
I love that question because for me, working as part of a camp program for children who've had a death in their family, one of the things I have seen is that children become the forgotten grievers. And now, in fairness, it's because we want to protect our children. And so we sometimes think that not talking about it might be better. We don't want to upset them. We might not know ourselves how to answer some questions. And that's all true. And that's fine, except when we don't talk to our children and we do treat them as forgotten grievers, we leave them to make up their own narratives around what's happened and what they think has happened and what is going on in the world. So it is absolutely the opposite. We need to not make it the elephant in the room. We need to create spaces and places for them to be able to express their grief. Now, not every child is going to be able to have the words, and that's okay, but there are support groups, there are journals, as you mentioned. I've created one, but there's tons of journals out there, that activity journals, art therapy, music therapy, camps all over North America, bereavement camps, and most of them, like ours, are free. So to give children that space separate and aside from the parents and to keep the conversations going, don't make it the elephant in the room. Everyone's talking about it. They're just or thinking about it. Now let's share and let them know that it's okay. It's not taboo.
Right. That just made me think about wanting to ask you a little bit about Myra's Foundation. Can you tell, the people watching a little bit about Myra's?
Sure. Myra's Kids Foundation is an organization that was started Well, we're in our 8th year, but we started off as a camp Erin. And like I said, those are all over North America. And we, at one point, created our own nonprofit so that we could do not only a camp program, a free weekend-long retreat, essentially, for children to honor the memory of the parent or the family member who died, because it could be anyone at any time, anyway, anyhow. And it gave children that separate space from their caregivers, because it's not always a parent, a caregiver, or guardian, to one, honor the memory and talk about it and take away the sense of taboo, and two, to have fun and just be kids. And the thing that is so magical about these programs is that the children will come in and say, "You mean everybody here's like me?" And they don't feel othered. They feel very connected. And so it's okay if they're laughing. Or we had a child whose great grandmother died, and she says, this is the only place where somebody actually doesn't say, "Well, what's wrong with you? It was your great grandmother. Why are you so sad?" Everybody accepts the whatever type of death has occurred and just supports one another. It's magical.
That's great. That's great. So, Corrie, if a parent experienced a miscarriage or a stillbirth, they often struggle with the question of when they should, try to conceive again. So I was wondering, what advice would you have on that decision? How do you think they find peace if they can't conceive again?
It's a loaded question. Well, let me start off with the fact that I do offer not only support groups for women who've had perinatal loss, stillbirth, and miscarriage, but also for men whose partners have had perinatal loss, stillbirth, and miscarriage, because there's a very different grieving process for each of them. But I'll say this: when the desire to have a child outweighs the fear of what's going to happen, because we can't guarantee, and it is heart-wrenching that the rose-colored glasses are taken off and that they don't see the world the same way as they did when they initially were planning, but the fear can overtake them. We don't know, we have no idea what's going to be, but if you want to have a child, there are many roads that lead to Rome. There's many ways that a person can conceive. And so it is, whether I'm working with someone or you're asking me the question, I really think it's important that they identify what the fear is and remember that just because it happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen again.
That's
I
true.
don't know if I answered the whole question. And then how to find peace, that's an individual process, I think, for each and every one of them. And I think we need the space, though, to honor. I want to say that miscarriage, stillbirth, perinatal loss is the most misunderstood and unrecognized loss out there. People get very uncomfortable talking about the death of a baby, understandably. So those that are going through it don't have the support that they often need and the recognition that they need, that it's okay to be really sad, and that none of the platitudes we get, this, Gary, really well. Oh, at least you can get pregnant, at least you have another child, anything with it, at least anything that it was God's will. No, it was not God's will for this child. I mean, if you spiritually want to believe that, that's fine. But for somebody else to impose that on you is not okay. So you find peace by everyone's going to find it in their own way, and what works for them and what helps them, not what somebody else tells them they need to do.
And I think sometimes too with stillbirth and miscarriages, because people don't see this actual soul, that existed, that people don't, I don't know, maybe relate to it as much as when someone loses a child of a certain age that they've seen and like experienced them, so I'm sure that makes it difficult on the parents as well.
Absolutely. And I will remind the parents to be that the minute you start planning having children, you think about what they're going to look like, what gender they might be, where they're going to go to school, what their room is going to look like. So you're a parent from the moment you start planning to become a parent.
So I have a good friend that lost her teenage son, and he died. The circumstances of his death, it was basically, and not to get into it, but it was an accident. And so one of the things that she told me that she really struggled with a lot was that when people would say to her, I'm so sorry about your son, how did he die? So do you think when a child dies, there's too much focus on like how they died? Because she found that really uncomfortable. Like she would say to me, like, why does it matter to everybody? Like, it's so frustrating that they keep asking me how he died. Like she wasn't able to say, well, he got cancer and he died. She didn't, I guess in a way, like it was a personal thing and it was a painful thing. And she didn't want to share why he died. So do you feel that people do that they focus on like why the child died?
I would agree with you, and you sort of in some ways answered part of the question yourself, because you recognize that it was something that made her uncomfortable, and if it made her uncomfortable, she doesn't owe anybody an explanation. I worked in a funeral home for 5 years, and people literally called all the time and said like, "Oh, so and so, what happened?" There's a real morbid curiosity that we have, but it is really, really none of anybody's business. It's very different. I think we should always be acknowledging somebody's loss, the death that occurred, not ignoring it, but you can ask gently, not about how, but about how they are. I would rather than focus on the person and the feelings and the meaning of that, then why do they need to know what that is about? I think that people, like I said, morbid curiosity. I also think that there's this somehow, if I know this, I can somehow avoid this. I can avoid it happening in my, it's like a little bit too close for comfort. It's so difficult, but really it is nobody's business. And certainly from the bereaved parent, caregiver, guardian's perspective, you don't know anybody any explanations.
So do you by any chance have a response to that? You know what I mean? I mean, for someone
Yeah.
like her, when someone does ask her, like, what do you say if you really like, hey, I don't want to tell you, I mean, like, how do you
Well,
nicely say
yes,
that? None of your
we
damn
do,
business. Like, how do you nicely say
yeah.
it?
Say I really prefer not to discuss the details of it. It's whether you want to say it's too difficult, or I just prefer not to discuss the details of it. It's not something that I think is that something that we should be discussing, or I'm comfortable discussing. How, I don't ask somebody, I'm going to get really facetious here, but I don't ask someone how much money they make.
Hmm.
Why, when it comes to death and dying, do we think it's okay? Ask personal questions.
Yeah,
Boundaries.
true. So how can parents find meaning and purpose in life after a child's death?
Um, it's sort of, I would say it could be really difficult, right? Sort of fresh or raw. And I don't have a timeline, because grief doesn't have a timeline. It's just a process that is forever, quite frankly. It would be my hope that as time goes on, and time is going to be kind of different for everybody, if one could start to make meaning by doing things that honor the memory of the person who died, doing things that that person liked, talking about them, remembering them. So, for example, a lot of people know, if they know my story, I had a brother that died many years ago. In fact, it was just 35 years. It took me about 6 years as a social worker to say, I want to focus on this. But now I feel like I honor him every single day with all the work I do. It doesn't come right away. And I think it's also important to recognize that there are people, like I spoke about earlier, someone who starts a foundation. There's a number of people I know that have started foundations to help others. Some people will erect a building or start a scholarship or buy a bench at a cemetery. But I don't only want to tie it to financially projects that require money. Lighting a candle, making their favorite food, taking their clothes. Many people make a quilt or do a stuffed animal that they can wear some of the clothing or a piece of the clothing. Anything that feels like you can keep their memory alive. And when people do these kinds of things and model this, that's actually called post-traumatic growth. But I can't say when that can be for someone, but it would be my dream and my hope that people can get to that place where they can talk about the person and they can honor that person in any way that they feel makes sense for them.
Mhm. So we are when I was a kid, I think, I may have been like about 13 or 14 years old. I had a cousin, I had an aunt and uncle. They had two boys, and my family was me and my brother. So it was two boys. So we were together a lot. And, the older one would play with my brother and the younger one would play with me. The younger one was killed in an accident. And so after that happened, my aunt and uncle separated, they got a divorce. And I remember my mother saying to me, oh, I said, oh, that's terrible. Like they seem so in love. And she said, well, Gary, that's very common after losing a child for marriages to fail after the death of a child. So what's your opinion on that? I mean, is that a myth? Because I did some research on it and I found that that's not actually the case. Like the majority or percentage of people that get divorced after the loss of a child is actually much lower than people think it is.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm so glad that we're raising it, because it is a myth. It's absolutely a myth. A couple, and you did the research, I did the research, a couple that has a solid foundation is going to withstand any crisis. They don't divorce because a child died. They divorce because they've had their foundation in their relationship was a bit cracked, whether they admitted it or didn't. And they cannot navigate now through this, because in fact, couples can become much more solid and much more together after a crisis. Crisis brings out the best and the worst in people. Okay. But they really can become such a solidified front because they share this terrible tragedy. So I appreciate what you're saying. I don't believe that, and I know it's a myth, and we hear that and it doesn't help people, but couples do not separate or divorce because of the death of a child. They separate or divorce because the foundation of their relationship is shaky or rocky and cannot withstand this. Now can become the tipping point.
You had talked a little bit about fathers too, because I do kind of in a way sympathize with fathers when there's a loss of a child, because I don't know why, but it seems like our society tends to focus on the mother whenever there's the loss of a child. So men and women I know grieve differently, and in fact at the health and wellness center that I work at, we have a support group that I think it's called like Just for Dads. And it's fathers. And I was actually really surprised, because in the support groups that I do, I don't have very many men. I do support groups for the loss of a partner or a spouse. And typically it's mostly women. I might have, 11 women and one man. But this support group, I was surprised, had so many men that were joining this Just for Dads that had lost a child group. So how do parents remain connected to each other when they're grieving in a different way? You know what I mean? Like if the wife is crying all the time, say, and maybe the husband's out chopping wood and that's what men do, or they're tinkering in the car. But maybe the wife is thinking, well, why isn't he as sad as I am? Or, so how did they stay connected when that happens?
It's a great question. It's recognizing that people in general grieve differently. No two people grieve the same way, even in the same family, even the same loss. That said, one might look at women as more typically intuitive grievers, which is more touchy-feely, talky, let's emotions, and men as more instrumental. Not always, and there's a continuum. So men are more instrumental, which means, what do I do? How do I fix it? I'm going out, I need to go out for a run, and that's how they manage. So the important piece of the couple is not projecting, understanding that first and foremost, and then not projecting on, you're not crying enough, you're not talking enough, well, you don't want to go out and do anything, and I need to try, I need to get the coroner's report, I need to have an autopsy done, I need to I had a case where one of the father needed to sue the city because of the accident and the road where their daughter had the accident. So that was his more concrete way of doing things. It's recognizing and supporting each other within the context of, what do you need and what do you need? And we're not always going to be, often not at all, on the same page, but that's okay. I'm going to respect what you need, you respect what I need, and that way we can find our way together and understand that it's not that you didn't love her as much or you didn't love her at all, or because you're not crying the way or grieving the way I think you should. And we get this from not just our partners, but from so many people, that pressure to grieve a certain way. And if you're not that person, that's why I don't even want to say that women typically they're instrumental, they're intuitive, but maybe someone is more instrumental. And other people get uncomfortable because you're not grieving the way they think you should be grieving. And I'm like, what should they be doing? That's what you would do. What is it that you need to do? So recognizing that as a couples are such an important piece, and respecting each other's grief process.
Yeah, and I think, I found that it's important too that, like you said, not everyone fits into that who's instrumental and who's intuitive, because I happen to be intuitive. I cry at like sad commercials, but I've had women in my support groups that will come up to me at the end of the group and say like, I'm really sorry I don't cry. Like, I feel like everyone's going to think I don't care. I just don't cry, and I said, it's okay. You're an instrumental griever, you're a woman. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an intuitive griever, so it is different for everyone. But so thanks for, making that more understandable. So this is I wanted to ask you, how can families that lost a child like find the support that they need? Because the center that I work for, it's called Hope Floats, and it's a center that was set up by a husband and wife that lost their 17-year-old child in a automobile accident. And one of the reasons that they set the center up is because after the loss of their child, they were having such a hard time finding where to get the support they needed for the loss of a child. So I was just wondering where, you work in the field much more than I do in regard to child loss, if you can help people understand like where they can get the support they need.
So it's terrific that you're again raising this. I'm part of the National Alliance of Grieving Children, or a National Alliance of Children's Grief, NACG, they changed the name. And you can go on the website, childrensgrief.org, and it literally lists by state what grief and bereavement services are available. I'm also part of the Canadian Alliance of Children's Grief, if Canadians are listening to this, and they also have a website where you can find a whole list of resources, also by province, of services that do exist. A lot of services, I have to say, are free. And there's a lot out there. You just, I know, I wish that it would just at your fingertips. It means a little bit of work sometimes, but going on, there's pretty much, there's over 500 members in the NACG, and I meet people from all over. So they have different places, different initiatives going on all over the states. And so it means reaching out. And please, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And I don't believe anybody can really do this alone. I love when people say, yeah, I'm good. I got this. I'm like, yeah, I'll see you in my office in about a year. But I know, and because they want to, and it may be culturally or socially how they were raised, that's what they believe, that's how you do it. But this is probably in general the most difficult thing, because we live in such a death-denying society, that we do need to reach out. And I am the hugest advocate of support groups that there is, because there's nothing like somebody else who can say, yeah, you get me, I get you. We're not going to have the same story, and that's fine, but you're also not going to judge me the same way that I feel like I might be judged anywhere else. So it's reaching out to the support groups, online support. Today, smaller world with technology, online support groups, in-person support groups, reading your books, my books, all the books that are out there. Because some people are readers, I respect that not everybody's a support group person. Get the individual counseling, that it will make all the difference. We think that we're really good at that, Gary? We shove it down, and denial is amazing for only so long, and then it's got to come out one way, shape, or form, and it will. So you're not helping yourself. Please no, reaching out is so important, and there are lots of resources out there.
I agree, and that's one of the biggest things I tell the people I work with is you're not alone, because I think when you lose someone you love, whether it's a child or whoever it is any loved one that you lose, you do have that feeling in the beginning, at least in the beginning, that you're alone. So it is important to reach out and get the help you need, just to even feel that you're not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing about a support group, is you're in a room with other parents that had the similar loss, and it does give you that feeling that you're not alone. So my last question, which I also think is my most important question, and you did talk a little bit about this before, is how can parents best honor the memory of their child that died?
So as I mentioned, so many different ways. We don't have to tie it to financially. You can start foundations and scholarships and go volunteer for something that they believe in. One of the families I mentioned, they started a foundation and their daughter love animals, so they sponsor pet therapy. You can speak out um, to different places and share your story if you're comfortable and that's something you want to do. Some people write, some people paint, some people dance, some people like I said, I've seen beautiful, the most stunning quilts made. A dad who was very involved in sports, so they took all his sports t-shirts, 3 kids, he must have had a lot of t-shirts, and they made the most spectacular quilts out of that. The couple whose child died, this foundation that they sponsor, they even sponsor some of the events for Myra's Kids Foundation. And uh, taking any kind of clothing, lighting candles, making someone's favorite food, mentioning their names in any way, shape, or form. I did something that I didn't anticipate would have the reaction it did, but 30 years after my brother died, I wrote a blog and I wrote 30 years later, 30 reasons what I'll always remember, 30 ways I'll always remember him. And I wrote it, and when I published it, it was really interesting to do, but I didn't expect the response I got. When I did it, some people who didn't know him thanked me because they were like, oh, wow, it was nice to learn more about your brother. And other people who knew him, well, they use it now as a platform for them to share. And it was, I didn't realize it. I don't know. I didn't think at the time, modeling how it's okay to at any time bring up and share and do and honor that person. So any way that you feel makes sense for you, because it has to, I can give you ideas, but it has to make sense for you. So, but doing it, I think sometimes we're afraid to do it because we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. To your point of what do I say and what do you say, one of my favorite lines to share with clients or anyone who's struggling with a loss is when somebody else tells you how you should be doing your grief, you thank them and say, that's just not how it works for me. And then you can add, consider yourself fortunate that you don't understand.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. So, Corrie, thank you so much for sharing your insights on child loss with us today. I really appreciate it. And I'll be posting on my Surviving Grief Facebook page the links to Corrie's books, and also a link to Myra's Kids Foundation as well, and also her Lost and Found TEDx presentation. And I have to tell you all before we end that how I met Corrie was through her TEDx presentation. So I was thinking about writing my first book, Surviving, Finding Your Way from Grief to Healing. And I went online and I thought, I want to find somebody else that is doing what I want to do. And someone had told me once, if there's something that you want to do in life, then you go out and you find someone that's doing it, and you watch them and you study them and you try to learn from them. And so I watched Corrie's TEDx, her Lost and Found TEDx, and I just thought it was fabulous. And then I rushed out and got her book because I thought I need to read this person's book. So I went out and got her book, Someone Died, What Now? And I read her book, and then I thought I would love to talk to this person. So I sent an email to her, and I figured I will never hear from this person. And I got an email back, and I was so excited about that email. And so she offered to do a Zoom call with me and to talk about my book. And we did that. And it was like having your idol call you and talk to you in person. So I just want to tell everyone that you have to watch this TEDx presentation, because it literally and figuratively changed my life. Because once I watched it, I realized what Corrie was doing so well was what I wanted to do. So I thank you for that. I thank you for being the person that inspired me to do what I do. So I am going to post that in the link. And then also, Corrie, if you could send me the link to that program you were telling me about, where parents could go online and find all the different resources.
Oh, sure.
And I'll include that for our viewers too. And if you guys have any questions at all or any comments at all, feel free to email me at Gary at sgrief.com. And you can also visit my Facebook page, Surviving Grief, or you can visit my website, Surviving Grief, at www.sgrief.com. And I want to thank you all so much for watching. And as I always say, remember, we're all just walking each other home. Again, Corrie, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
Feelings mutual. Thank you.
Take care.